The lights of the United Nations chamber flickered as tension filled the air. Delegates from across the world leaned forward, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. At the center stage stood Denzel Washington, not as an actor but as a voice of the people, his expression sharp, his eyes unwavering. Across from him sat Donald Trump, defiant, his arms crossed, face flushed with the irritation of being challenged. Cameras zoomed in, broadcasting the scene live to millions of viewers around the globe. This was no ordinary political debate, it was a direct confrontation about one of the most controversial scandals in recent memory, the Epstein cover-up. Denzel's voice, calm yet thunderous in its weight, cut through the silence. "Mr. Trump," he began, "you've spent years dodging accountability, but today the truth will not hide. America, and the world, deserves answers." The room stirred. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, lenses flashed, and murmurs swept across the chamber. Trump adjusted his tie, smirked, and fired back, "You're an actor, Denzel. Stick to Hollywood. You don't know politics, you don't know the real game." The audience gasped, but Denzel didn't flinch. His hand struck the podium, echoing like a gavel, as he declared, "This isn't about games. This is about justice, about the victims whose voices were silenced. And you, your name, your power, have been at the center of the cover-up. You can't run from this anymore." The words struck deep, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Even Trump's usual bravado seemed to falter, if only for a fleeting second. The showdown had begun, and the world held its breath, waiting to see what truths would finally be exposed. Trump leaned forward, gripping the microphone as if it were a weapon. His voice rose, combative and dismissive. "You think you can stand there and lecture me? You don't know the first thing about power. Epstein was a nobody, a distraction created by the media. I built America's strongest economy, I kept the country safe. And now you want to drag my name through the mud with baseless accusations? Shameful." He pointed a finger across the chamber at Denzel, his words echoing with venom. But Denzel's composure remained unshaken, his presence dominating the room in a way no script could capture. He raised his hand slowly, silencing the murmurs of the audience. "Baseless," he replied, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Then why are documents surfacing that link your inner circle to Epstein's dealings? Why did your administration fight to keep records sealed? The truth is bigger than one man. It's about a system that protects predators and punishes the vulnerable." The room buzzed with nervous energy. Some delegates exchanged glances, others nodded quietly, acknowledging the weight of Denzel's words. Trump chuckled bitterly, shaking his head, but the laughter felt hollow. "Fake news," he sneered, "that's all this is. Another Hollywood stunt. You're good at playing heroes on screen, but this is real life. And in real life, I win." Denzel stepped closer to the podium, his gaze piercing, his tone resonating with raw conviction. "This isn't Hollywood, Mr. Trump. This is history. And history will remember who stood on the side of truth, and who hid behind lies." The chamber erupted in gasps and whispers. Journalists frantically typed their headlines. Somewhere in the crowd, a delegate whispered, "He's saying what no one else dares." At that moment, it wasn't an actor versus a politician, it was the voice of conscience against the machinery of denial. And the world was watching, breathless, waiting for the next blow. The silence that followed was deafening. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every twitch, every bead of sweat glistening on Trump's forehead. His jaw tightened as he adjusted his tie, trying to mask the unease creeping into his expression. Denzel didn't flinch. He let the silence hang, weaponizing it, forcing the weight of the moment to settle in the room like a storm cloud. Then he spoke, his tone steady but charged with righteous fire. "America has suffered enough under leaders who confuse strength with cruelty, who mistake lies for strategy. When men like Epstein thrived, it was because powerful allies looked the other way, or worse, gave them cover. And you, Mr. Trump, stood among them." Gasps shot through the audience. Trump slammed his hand on the podium, his voice cracking with fury. "Lies. Total lies. You're nothing but an actor pretending to know politics. You don't belong here. But the eruption only deepened the divide in the room. Some clapped for Trump, their cheers short and defensive. Yet far more leaned forward, drawn to Denzel's composure, to the authenticity in his words that carried no script, no teleprompter, only truth. Denzel's eyes scanned the room, then locked on Trump with unwavering focus. "I may be an actor, but at least I know the difference between a role and reality. You've been performing for years, on stages, at rallies, in front of cameras. But your performance has cost lives, shattered trust, and buried justice beneath your ego." The words landed like a hammer blow. Even the journalists hesitated, unsure if they were witnessing political theater or the collapse of a carefully constructed facade. Trump leaned back, sneering, but the tension in his posture betrayed him. He muttered, "Weak. You're weak," but it sounded more like self-defense than strength. Denzel's reply was calm, cutting. "Truth isn't weakness. Covering for predators, protecting abusers, that's weakness. And deep down, you know it." At that moment, the hall no longer felt like a debate chamber, it felt like a courtroom. And in the court of public opinion, Trump was already losing ground. Trump's face turned crimson, his hands gripping the edges of the podium as though he could anchor himself against the tidal wave of truth crashing over him. He pointed a trembling finger at Denzel, his voice booming but cracking under the pressure. "You don't know what you're talking about. Epstein was a monster, and I had nothing to do with him. This is a smear, pure and simple, a disgrace." The crowd erupted into murmurs, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself was electric. Some shouted in Trump's defense, but others jeered, their voices echoing through the chamber like a verdict being read. Denzel stood still, calm yet unyielding, his silence again more powerful than Trump's thunder. Then, with the precision of a blade, he delivered his next strike: disgrace? The real disgrace is the silence of those who had the power to stop him but chose not to. The disgrace is watching a nation's trust crumble because leaders like you cared more about protecting themselves than protecting the vulnerable. The room fell into an uneasy hush. Journalists' pens scratched feverishly across notebooks, cameras zoomed closer, catching the rage etched on Trump's face and the unwavering steel in Denzel's eyes. Trump laughed bitterly, a sound that rang hollow. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Just another Hollywood liberal pretending to care about real Americans." Denzel's reply was immediate, sharp, and devastating. "This isn't about me. It's about justice. And justice doesn't care about your excuses, your slogans, or your endless self-pity. Justice is what you fear most because it can't be bought, it can't be staged, and it can't be buried." The audience gasped again, and this time the silence afterward was different. It wasn't shock, it was recognition. People were beginning to see a pattern, the cracks in the carefully polished image Trump had built. Denzel had shifted the atmosphere, dragging the conversation away from politics and into morality. The more Trump barked, the smaller he seemed, the more Denzel stood calm and precise, the larger his presence grew. By now, the confrontation wasn't just a clash of personalities, it had become a clash of eras. One represented a desperate grip on power, the other a fearless demand for accountability. And everyone in that room knew the tide was turning. Trump's voice rose higher, straining as he tried to regain control of the narrative. "This is a witch hunt. The same lies, the same garbage they've been throwing at me for years. And now you, Denzel, you think you can stand there and lecture me? You don't know the first thing about running a country." He jabbed the air with his finger, each word laced with fury, but behind the bluster, there was a flicker of something else: fear. Denzel didn't flinch. He leaned slightly forward, his tone steady but his words cutting like steel. "Running a country isn't about running from the truth. It's not about dodging accountability or hiding behind slogans. Leadership is about facing the ugly reality, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you. Epstein didn't operate alone, and the world knows it. People in power enabled him, and you were one of those people who looked the other way." Gasps rippled across the hall. The tension was suffocating now, as if every person in the room held their breath, waiting for Trump's response. His face twisted with anger, his fist slamming against the podium. "That's a lie. A disgusting lie. You don't get to stand there, some actor, and accuse me of things you can't prove. His words were loud, but his voice cracked under the weight of the accusation, betraying just how rattled he had become. Denzel didn't let up. His gaze was unrelenting, his presence commanding. Proof? The proof is in the silence, in the shadows, in the people who suddenly can't answer simple questions when the names come up. Justice doesn't always wear a badge or carry a gavel, it starts when someone has the courage to break the silence. That's what this moment is about. The camera zoomed in on Trump's reddened face, sweat glistening under the harsh studio lights. The audience sat in stunned silence, every eye fixed on the clash unfolding before them. Trump barked, "You're finished. Nobody believes you." But his voice wavered, and the hollow echo of desperation clung to every syllable. Denzel straightened, his calm demeanor undisturbed. "No, Mr. Trump, what's finished is the era of pretending this doesn't matter. The American people aren't blind, and they won't be silenced anymore." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in a wave of applause and shouts that shook the walls. The studio lights seemed to grow hotter, the silence between the applause like a drumbeat pounding in Trump's chest. His jaw tightened as he leaned closer to his microphone. "You're grandstanding, Denzel. You're trying to make headlines because without me, you'd have nothing to talk about. You're exploiting lies, just like the fake news media has always done." His tone carried arrogance, but his eyes darted nervously, betraying cracks in his carefully built armor. Denzel, calm as a mountain in a storm, placed both hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. "Headlines? This isn't about headlines. This is about human lives that were destroyed, about truth that was buried, and about power abused without shame. Epstein may be gone, but the network, the rot, it's still here. And you, Mr. Trump, were too close to it to simply wash your hands and walk away." The audience gasped, the words landing like a hammer blow. Trump's face flushed a deeper red, his hand slamming against the table with a sharp crack. "Enough. You don't have the evidence. You don't have anything. Just stories, rumors, conspiracies." His voice was loud, echoing across the set, but it lacked the conviction of a man in control. The camera zoomed in on his trembling hands, catching details he wished the world wouldn't see. Denzel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Sometimes the most damning evidence is the fear in a man's own reaction. "Look around you, Donald. Do you hear the silence when I say Epstein's name? Do you see the way people shift in their seats? That silence isn't empty, it's guilt. It's shame. And it's power crumbling." His words, slow and deliberate, cut through the air like a blade. The tension was unbearable. Commentators in the wings whispered frantically into their earpieces, anchors readying for breaking news alerts. Trump adjusted his tie, his hands shaking, his lips pressed thin as he struggled for control. "You'll regret this," he hissed into the microphone, but it sounded more like a plea than a threat. Denzel's eyes never left him. "The only thing I regret," he said firmly, "is how long it took for someone to look you in the eye and call you what you are. This isn't Hollywood, Mr. Trump. This is history, and tonight, it will remember who stood for truth, and who tried to bury it." The crowd erupted again, louder than before, as the tension broke into thunderous applause. For the first time, Trump didn't respond with a quip or an insult, he simply sat back, his expression a mixture of rage and fear, knowing the cameras were catching every second of it. The control room was chaos. Producers shouted over one another, demanding tighter shots, wider cuts, anything to capture the historic confrontation unraveling on live television. Across millions of screens, Americans leaned forward in disbelief. Hashtags exploded on social media, hashtag Trump vs. Denzel, hashtag Epstein questions, hashtag Truth on Air, trending within minutes. But in the studio itself, all that noise faded against the unbearable stillness of the stage. Trump tried to recover, leaning back in his chair, forcing a smirk across his lips. "You think people are going to believe you? They've heard it all before. Accusations, gossip, baseless attacks. I survived impeachment, witch hunts, and every desperate attempt to take me down. You're nothing but another actor, another puppet. His words carried bravado, but his voice cracked on the last syllable, betraying the weight of the moment. Denzel slowly shook his head, his calm presence contrasting sharply with Trump's unraveling composure. The difference tonight, Donald, is that you're not facing politicians or lawyers who play by your rules. You're facing the truth. And the truth doesn't bend to intimidation, to money, or to power. The truth doesn't care about your rallies or your ratings. It's relentless, and it always finds its way to the surface. Trump's eyes narrowed, his finger jabbing toward Denzel. You don't know what you're talking about. Epstein was just another name, another distraction. You don't know the people I know. You don't understand the deals, the risks, the... But Denzel cut him off, his voice suddenly sharper, stronger. What I understand is that when men like you hide behind power, real people suffer. Women silenced. Victims ignored. Justice delayed. You call it a distraction? I call it a stain on this country's soul, and your name is written all over it. The audience gasped again, the words echoing like a verdict. Trump's composure cracked fully now, his face contorted with anger as he slammed his palm against the table once more. Lies. All lies. This is a setup. His voice boomed, but the desperation was undeniable, his fury exposing what his words couldn't protect. Denzel didn't flinch. He leaned forward, locking eyes with Trump, his tone now low and measured. History doesn't remember excuses. It remembers actions. And tonight, it will remember this: you were given a chance to answer the truth, and instead, you tried to shout it down. But the louder you shout, the more the world sees the fear you're trying to hide. The applause thundered again, longer this time, rolling like waves across the studio. Even the moderators sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment burn itself into history. Trump glanced toward the cameras, realizing he was no longer in control of the narrative. His empire of spin and spectacle was crumbling under the weight of a single voice that refused to bend. And Denzel, calm and steady, simply sat back in his chair, the silence after his words more powerful than any speech. The silence stretched so long that it became unbearable, the kind of silence that makes every heart in the room beat louder. Trump adjusted his tie, tugged at his sleeve, trying to rebuild the image of control. But the cameras caught everything. His restless tapping fingers, the sweat glistening just above his collar, the twitch of his jaw. Every sign of weakness was amplified, broadcast in high definition to millions of viewers. Finally, Trump forced a laugh, a hollow, brittle sound. This is theater. Nothing but Hollywood theater. And you, he sneered, gesturing at Denzel, you're just another actor trying to stay relevant. The insult landed with all the weight of desperation, his words echoing like a shield already cracked. Denzel didn't blink. He leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting. Donald, if this were theater, you'd know your lines. Instead, you stumble. You lash out. You dodge. But the truth keeps dragging you back to the same point: accountability. Real men don't fear questions. Real leaders don't silence victims. And no amount of stagecraft will erase that. The audience broke into applause again, but this time it wasn't just noise, it was conviction. People rose to their feet, clapping, some even shouting words of support toward Denzel. Trump's face darkened, the spotlight that once made him invincible now exposing every crack in his armor. He pounded the table once more. You're all being played. Do you think any of this matters? Do you think people out there care about Epstein? They care about jobs, borders, security. They care about me protecting them from chaos. His words thundered, but his body language betrayed the unraveling, eyes darting, voice straining, fury masking fear. Denzel waited patiently, letting Trump's outburst echo into nothing. Then, with deliberate calm, he spoke, people don't fear chaos, Donald. They fear betrayal. They fear leaders who trade truth for power, who pretend to protect while protecting only themselves. That's what history will remember. Not your speeches, not your slogans, but the lives that were lost in the shadows while you looked the other way. The weight of those words hit harder than any accusation yet. A murmur rippled through the audience, the moderators sat frozen, and Trump's eyes blazed with fury. For the first time, he looked cornered, not by prosecutors, not by journalists, but by the unshakable truth voiced live, with no escape. And in that moment, Denzel's calm, steady presence felt less like an actor delivering lines and more like a mirror reflecting a nation's conscience back at the man who thought he could escape it. The chamber felt like it was holding its breath. Trump, red-faced and pacing, tried desperately to regain control. "This is a witch hunt," he barked, but his words fell flat, smothered by the echo of Denzel's last statement. Cameras zoomed in on him, capturing a man visibly cornered, his bravado cracking under the weight of exposure. For years, he had wielded outrage like a shield, but tonight, that shield looked battered and broken. Denzel stood tall, his calm presence commanding the room. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. "America doesn't need louder lies," he said, his tone steady but ringing with conviction. "It needs leaders willing to face uncomfortable truths. And if you can't do that, then you're not leading, you're hiding." The silence that followed was seismic. Journalists froze mid-typing, realizing they were witnessing not just a clash, but a turning point. Trump attempted to laugh, to dismiss it all, but the sound was hollow, almost painful. For the first time, his performance, once his greatest weapon, had collapsed in front of millions. A wave of applause swept the chamber, swelling into cheers that drowned out Trump's muttering protests. Delegates rose to their feet, some hesitantly, others with thunderous enthusiasm. The cameras caught it all: Denzel's composed face, Trump's unraveling fury, the split between denial and awakening. Outside, social media erupted in real time. Hashtags exploded. Clips of Denzel's piercing words, "You are not America," went viral within minutes. Commentators declared it the most defining live TV moment of the decade. As the moderator tried to restore order, Denzel delivered his final words, a quiet sentence that resonated like a verdict: "History will remember tonight, not because of who shouted, but because of who stood for truth." And with that, the debate was over. Trump slumped back into his chair, seething in silence, while Denzel walked off the stage with the calm stride of a man who knew he hadn't just won an argument, he had shifted the narrative of a nation. The broadcast faded to black, leaving millions of Americans staring at their screens, stunned, knowing they had witnessed a moment that would echo for years. Tonight wasn't just about politics, it was about truth. In a world drowning in lies and noise, moments like this remind us that courage still matters. Whether you agree or disagree, one thing is clear: history was written in front of our eyes tonight. And the question remains: are we ready to face it?